Action SA is taking the Independent Electoral Commission, that's the IEC, to court over its administration of the Multiparty Democracy Fund. This challenge will put the Political Party Funding Act to its first legal test. The Act came into effect in April. Exactly what is the issue here? Let's find out from Action SA National Chairperson Michael Bowman to discuss their concerns. Michael, good afternoon and welcome to the Midday View on eNCA. I guess everybody welcomed this act because it's going to, for the first time, introduce transparency into who's funding which political party, so we know who we're dealing with. But there's one aspect of this that's making you unhappy. What is it?
Well, Dan, thanks very much, and thanks for having us back on. It's about the Multiparty Democracy Fund. This is a fund that is established in terms of the Act. It is to be managed and administered, quote unquote, by the IEC. And the contents of that fund are to be dispersed quarterly to political parties based on their share of representation in Parliament. It's intended that people could put money into the fund and then it would, enhance democracy, so-called, by distributing the fund to different political parties rather than picking any one political party.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that?
Well, I think the primary issue we have is that the IEC is taking on the role of actively fundraising for this fund. So rather than sitting back and making sure that people are aware of its existence, like, for example, by placing an advertisement in the newspaper like government does when awareness is the intended outcome, the IEC, according to a PLC meeting held at the end of May, admitted as much that they were approaching donors directly to solicit donations for the fund. And the issue there, Dan, is that the IEC is bound to see free and fair elections. That is their constitutional mandate. They need to be impartial.
So you don't trust, Michael, so Action SA doesn't trust that the IEC that oversees free and fair elections would manage this fund because it's fundraising itself, would manage this fund properly?
I think the legislation never intended for the IEC to actively fundraise for the fund.
Who should fundraise? Who should fundraise? If the IEC is bound by the new Electoral Act, the Multiparty Democracy Funding Act, and they are overseeing it, who in your view then, as the Action SA, should oversee the fundraising or do the fundraising for this fund?
The intention is not that there is active fundraising for the fund, but that the fund must be established and administered by the IEC, and that donors who wish to make donations into the fund may do so. But it is the act of actively soliciting those donations by the IEC that breaches their constitutional mandate of being free and fair, in that it benefits the 14 represented political parties at the expense of those who are not represented.
But if you win some votes, you will be represented in Parliament, and going forward, you'll also benefit from the fund.
Well, that would be in 2024, so that would be 3 years from now before that were to happen.
So basically you are upset that you won't get any money until 2024, and that's also depending.
Not at all, actually,
that also depends whether or not you'll get a seat in Parliament.
Yeah, well, we are confident we will get seats in Parliament, and it's not so much the fact that we feel like we're not getting our piece of the pie, so to speak. We just don't think the IEC has any role in fundraising for political parties. They've got a very important job right now, Dan, and that is to provide free and fair elections in a very difficult environment and not to fundraise on behalf of some political parties.
Okay, so from what you've said, you simply believe the following, and correct me if I'm wrong. The IEC oversees elections, and then there's this now new fund which it must make people aware of through an advert in paper and leave it there, not go around actively knocking on people's doors or companies or organizations or potential donors and say, please bring in the money to this fund. That's what you don't want.
Absolutely, because at that point they are taking sides in the electoral race.
But they are not, because in my view, educate me if I'm wrong, they are going around to say, we've got this new fund. It's never happened before in the history of South Africa, in democratic South Africa. So please help us put in money. Then they will distribute it accordingly to the proportional representation of parties in Parliament. I don't think they're favoring any party or they're being political. Why do you think they're being political?
Well, I mean, if the defined beneficiaries of that fund are the 14 political parties that were represented from the 2019 elections, by definition, they're being political. Because subsequently, new political parties like Action SA have launched,
but
and
Michael,
they are not going to benefit.
I hear you, but that's a current number of parties in Parliament who are allocated budgets and seats according to their proportional representation. Let's say Action SA Come 24 is party number 15. If there's more parties, if others don't drop, for example, we don't know what the general election will produce, you'll also be a beneficiary for that. They won't discriminate against you. Are you fearing that they could use this power of fundraising to decide who gets how much? I mean, I don't understand. I'm trying to understand what is the issue here.
Even if we are represented in Parliament in 2024, Dan, our position is that the IEC should still not be fundraising. It's not about, whether we benefit or not from the fund.
Okay.
It's just that for the IEC to ensure free and fair elections, they can't be referee and cheerleader at the same time. And when they are fundraising on behalf of some political parties, they are playing both roles.
They are fundraising on behalf of all the political parties in Parliament, and you feel that would be unfair. They should rather just create awareness and stand aside and wait for people to freely deposit the money into the fund, and then how should it then be divided afterwards?
Well, just to be clear, it's not just that is my opinion. Is that in the legislation it says manage and administer. If it intended for the IEC to play an active role in fundraising, it would have said so. But the drafters of the legislation did not include that.
So the two words, it's manage and administer. And you don't think fundraising is under management?
No, I certainly don't.
So when is this case going to court?
Well, we're busy consulting our lawyers. It's a very complex matter because there are grounds of urgency that have to be met. So we will probably be completing our papers by the end of this week and then filing next week.
And you'll be filing them to say, basically, IEC do not fundraise.
Well, certainly. I think the first step is there must be an interdict to make sure that all the funds that they have fundraised so far cannot be dispersed until the substantive question of the legitimacy of the IEC's action has actually been dealt with.
Yeah, so you are upset that you won't get any money before the next elections.
Not at all. The legislation doesn't entitle us to more money. Our contention is that the political parties that are going to get that money are not supposed to get that money because the IEC is not meant to be fundraising on their behalf. Because funding our competitors is disadvantaging us.
Okay, I hear you. We'll have to leave it there and let's see how the court will decide. But I'm still not clear that there's an issue here. There would be an issue for me. Just as a parting shot, Michael, you can respond to it if you wish. There would be an issue if the following. They've gone out as IEC, they've knocked on doors, they've collected the money. Then they also decide how much goes to the EFF, how much goes to the ANC, the DA, the IFP, the ACDP, the Freedom Front Plus of this world. I would have a problem that they've gathered the money, then they are still deciding. Meanwhile, they're using a formula of proportional representation, which has been used in allocating seats in Parliament. If there were a judge and jury and distributor and decision-making and finance minister and all of that at the same time, I would think you have a point. That is my view.
Well, Dan, I completely understand that. But, here's our view, is that if there are going to be let's call it 28 political parties that are going to be contesting a municipality like Johannesburg in 2021. And 14 of those political parties are being fundraised for by this fund because the IEC is actively knocking on doors rather than passively administering the fund. It would be my contention that the remainder of those political parties are being prejudiced by an organization who the Constitution insists must be acting independently and overseeing free and fair elections.
Okay, well, we'll have to wait and see what the court decides. Thank you for your time, and thanks for responding in the last few minutes. I took longer than I should have, and I'm pleased, though, that my producer, Aisha Jacobs, didn't whisper those words that she normally does in my ear to tell me to end the interview. Thank you very much. That's Michael Beaumont, Action SA National Chairperson. We'll have to wait and see what the court will decide. Still,